Welcome to the speaker series on a shot glass of recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. You get a house, you get a car, then you start thinking that's all you are, but you don't know the truth. So let me spell it out for you. Now I got your attention, now there's a start. Now sit and listen to my favorite part. Life's been giving us some clues. The answer lies inside of your.
I am Lisa, the host of A Shot Glass of Recovery, and this is our speaker series. Let's sit back and get ready for some more experience, strength, and hope.
I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic with alcoholism. It's great to be in an AA meeting. I thank you for inviting me to share my experience, strength, and hope. And really, what I will be sharing is my gratitude for Alcoholics Anonymous. It's been an incredible journey. Well, let me give you a little bit of information. My sobriety date is February the 10th, 2005. I have a home group that meets in person here in New Jersey, where I live. It meets at 7 a.m., 6 days a week. And I also have home group in Primetime, which is a Zoom meeting. So we do. And while my sobriety date is in 2005, I've been in 12-step recovery, the rooms of 12-step recovery since 1988. Okay. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous in 2004, I had no idea I was an alcoholic. Okay. As I said, I suffer from alcoholism. And what that means for me, that manifests for me in my mind. The book tells me that alcoholism centers in our mind. And for me, alcoholism is a mind power disease. It's in my mind. And the way it manifests is that my mind is unsatisfiable, highly fault finding. It talks to me in my own voice. It's always in a rush. It doesn't deal with frustration well. And it absolutely hates the word no. And I had been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 15 and a half years, and I didn't know that. it, you know, my whole journey has been guided by a power greater than myself, who I choose to call God. God was guiding my life since I was a kid, and I didn't realize it until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. And as I always say, the greatest gift of Alcoholics Anonymous has been the gift of awareness of what I'm up against as an alcoholic dealing with alcoholism. So in 1988, I was always, since I was a kid, I always felt apart from. I never felt a part of until I got some liquor in me. And interestingly, I had my first taste of alcohol. I don't know, I was either 4 or 5. I was at a large family gathering, and we were celebrating a religious holiday. And part of that experience is that there's wine on the table, and at different points of the ceremony, they'll pick up the wine glass and take a sip of wine. And they're not drinking the wine like a wine drinker drinks it. They're just doing it for this religious experience. And I got a hold of it. I gobbled the whole glass. I got drunk, and they put me to the side, and, they kind of laughed, and I probably ended up nodding out, but it was a drunk. And every time we would gather together as a family and the wine was on the table, I would go to the wine. For me, alcohol made me feel okay. And when I look at pictures of myself when I was very, very young, there's never a smile on my face. I don't know why, but that's what I see. So I was always, as I said, feeling apart from. And then it wasn't, by the by the age of 7, I would say I had emotionally left my family of origin. I didn't realize that my mind has this fault finding tendency, and I found fault with them and went out in the world thinking I'm by myself and how can I survive emotionally? This is all emotionally. And what I would do is I would find friends and back, at 7 and 8 and 9, when I'm in elementary school, I'm looking for friends who seem to have what I'm lacking. Okay, whether they seem to be doing better in school, whether they seem to have better athletic prowess, whether they have cooler clothes, and I will find a way of ingratiating myself to those people and to make them my friend, thinking that that's going to make me feel okay. If I only have this relationship, I'll feel okay. And then all of a sudden, I'll have this relationship and I'll see somebody else who I think has more of what I'm looking for. And I'll totally abandon the first person and move on to the second person and do the same thing. And this is a pattern that will continue. In elementary school, well, up until about the 7th grade, it really just involved males. By 7th grade on, it's involving females with the same pattern. Boy, this girl's really hot. I've got to get her to be my girlfriend. I put all kinds of attention to her. I get her to be my girlfriend. Wait a minute, this one's even hotter. And I abandon the first one to go to the second one. And in college, the same thing goes on. I didn't understand that I had this unsatisfiable mind, and that's an example of it. So in college, because I feel less than, not good enough, I've got to achieve. I've got to achieve good grades. I've got to achieve social status. It talks about our instincts, the instinct for social security, for sexual, you know, instinct. All those instincts are going wild, all right? And I'm involved in everything. I'm the president of my fraternity in college. I'm a resident counselor in the dormitories. I'm on student government. I'm on the gymnastics team. I'm in the players. I'm in everything, okay? Seeking to feel okay, thinking that if I just get involved in these activities, I'll be okay. So I have to do real well in academically. So during the week I study, but comes time for Friday night or Saturday night, and we're going to have a social interaction with women. My fraternity will be with a sorority. I've got to get drunk. And once I introduce that alcohol into my system, I can't stop. I drink until I black out. And I want that buzz so bad that I'm not drinking beer. I'm going right for the whiskey. It gets me there faster. And literally, I drink to blackout. And I don't know how, but drinking to blackout, I would get behind the wheel of a car and somehow I'd end up in my bed, whether it be my dormitory or an apartment at a later time. And I would have this incredible hangover. And I hated those hangovers. And I'd swear, I am never going to do this again. And the same thing repeats the next weekend when there's a social event. For me to feel comfortable enough to feel part of the group as opposed to apart from the group, I've got to introduce alcohol or later some other mood altering substance to make me feel okay. So I became a binge drinker. Once I introduced the alcohol, there was no stopping it. And I knew nothing about alcoholism or that, the allergy that is described in the doctor's opinion in the big book. I just thought that's the way I drank. And that drinking caused many embarrassments, not only for me, but for my family, particularly for my former wife, who, right out of college, I found somebody attractive that I thought I had to have to complete my journey or to do my journey with. And, I was like 22 and she was 21. And we had no idea that I was suffering from untreated alcoholism. I literally was self-will run riot. And I held that poor woman hostage for 23 years until she finally said, "I've had enough," and ended that marriage up to 30 years ago. So my alcoholism, I was just reading recently with one of my sponsees. And by the way, not only do I have home groups, but I have a sponsor who I've been working with for the past 18 years, and he has a sponsor. And lineage of sponsorship goes back to the Pacific Group with Clancy I, for those of you who are familiar with that. So it's a strong lineage of sponsors. And I also have the privilege of working with sponsees, and what a gift that is. So we were just reading and in the book, and we're reading about, where the farmer comes out of the storm cellar and says, well, it looks like the wind stopped, Mom. No problem here. That whole thing of I stopped drinking and now everything's fine. Well, by the time I had, stopped drinking, that marriage was over. And so that really registered with me. The other thing that I guess I'm thinking about, for me, the big book, the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, is not just a book, it's a spiritual treatise. Because uh, from my perspective, Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual program, a program of spiritual recovery. That's what I found. You know, on page 64, it says very clearly, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Well, what's my spiritual malady? My spiritual malady is thinking that I'm I'm alone, I'm separated, I'm separated from God, and I'm separated from others. And the solution to that has been to maintain conscious contact with God and with others. And that's where the gift of the journey in 12-step recovery came in. So as I had said, I always felt apart from, even though, my outside looked fine. I had a career, I had advanced degrees, I had this attractive wife, I had a beautiful daughter, and I was absolutely broken inside, absolutely miserable. And God picked me up and he brought me into the rooms of 12-step recovery. It wasn't a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, it was a meeting of Codependents Anonymous. I don't know how I got there. Something got me there. And I've often heard people refer to God as something, that's what got me there. And I knew when I entered that room, I felt a level of comfort, a level of ease that I had never experienced before. Not in my uh, immediate family of origin, not in my extended family of origin, not in all the groups that I had been involved with, all through my schooling and after schooling social life. I felt totally comfortable there. The experience that I can relate to is people say that, for them, it was like finding the mothership that had dropped us off, and that was my experience. I finally felt that I'm not alone anymore. That was the greatest experience of coming into the rooms of 12-step recovery. And I need to go to meetings in 12-step recovery every day to maintain that, not feeling alone, not thinking that I'm the only one who feels and thinks the way I do. And, I identify in all the meetings that I share. So anyhow, as I said, that started in '88. And what I really got out of it, and I was in those meetings for 16 years. They didn't have meetings every day. Whenever they did have meetings, I would attend the meetings. And what did I really get from that? I got from that fellowship. We had the 12 steps, just as we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. The only difference is in the first step, it says that I'm powerless over others and my life is unmanageable. Where in AA, it's I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable. So we had those steps and everything. And and I was my alcoholism in those 16 years was very active. I was still drinking. I was still using other mood altering substance. I didn't know that, there was a problem with that because they didn't deal with that in that 12-step recovery group. So in 2004, a friend of mine in Codependents Anonymous invited me to go to an AA meeting. And he said, "Mark, I think you'll get something out of this." And I went to the meeting, and it was a beginner's meeting on a Saturday. And the group was called the Winner's Circle. And they all sat around in a circle, and everybody introduced themselves. And when it came time for me, I introduced myself as I'm Mark. I'm a codependent. I knew nothing else. And then I was getting so much out of those meetings. I've come to understand that codependency for me is just one little aspect of untreated alcoholism. I didn't know it at that time. Okay. So, and now my daughter, who will have a birthday this in a couple of days, when she was born and I was in the room and she was delivered to me, I held her and I really felt the presence of God. I didn't have a relationship with God at that point. I thought that, people talked about God and all right, there must be a God. But I felt the that God was in that room and that God had given this gift to my former wife and myself. And once my what a former wife was given a room and I could give my daughter to her, I went home and got high. I had to get higher. Being with God was not enough. I needed to get even higher. And what I also thought, and here's where my codependency really came in, I really felt that my responsibility was to save this young girl from ever experiencing any of the pain that life might offer, as if I had that ability. How delusional that was. So now let's move forward into 2005. So because I was, a binge drinker and not a daily drinker, it wasn't difficult for me to put the plug in the jug, okay? And I put the plug in the jug, as I said, in February the 10th, 2005. And interestingly enough, it was once again, I started at a family gathering, and now I'm at a family gathering again, celebrating one of my cousin's 50th birthday parties. And I must have had at least 10 or 12 absolutes on the rocks. And I don't know how, but I drove about 50 miles from Manhattan in New York City to my home in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and got home safely. Okay. And I decided that, I'm getting so much out of this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that I'm going to put the plug in the jug. And I did so. And I still wasn't working with a sponsor or anything like that. I felt camaraderie, I guess you'd say. So now it's April of 2005. And my daughter she just graduated from university in June. And now the following April, she's going for her first job from New Jersey up to Massachusetts. And as I had done throughout her life, I'm micromanaging her life. Okay. And we are in real conflict because I'm getting into business that's not my business. And I'm going to pick up my friend. At this point, he's in an assisted living facility because he's getting older and he's no longer driving, to bring him to that Saturday beginners meeting. And I finally got step one. This is after 16 plus years of being familiar with the 12 steps. And I realized, yes, I'm powerless, not only over alcohol, I'm powerless over life, over other people. What an experience that was. That was a spiritual experience. And it was as if the weight of the world was lifted from my shoulders. I embraced that powerlessness. What a gift it was. And then I started working with a sponsor and I realized, I thought I was God. And this is really before getting into the big book. Okay. I'm thinking is my own experience. Who do you think you are? You think you're God? You have godlike qualities? And I realized, no, I'm not God. I'm just a child of God. And then I went back, and that was a great experience. Then I went back and got a sponsor and started working in AA. And what do I know? On page 62, we're reading, and it said, we have to quit playing God. It doesn't work. What do you mean? It's not just me that's playing God. Other people are playing God. and I've learned, I identify with so much in this book. As I say, for me, it's really a spiritual treatise. The the things that are being brought up, you know, they're not just words. They are serious, serious things to contemplate. For instance, on page 53, where we're given the proposition, either God is everything or God is nothing. Either God is or God isn't. What is our choice to be? You can't just read over that and move on. What is the implication for my life? How does this affect my life? Well, I'll tell you with no apologies whatsoever, God is everything in my life. And that has made all the difference in my life. I'm no longer trying to run my life. I realize I'm a complete defeat at running my life emotionally. Okay. My thinking life, it's warped. I have crazy ideas that come to me and I don't pick them up. They're coming from the subconscious, I've learned. Okay. And I can't stop them. But what I can do is bring them immediately to God and simply say, God, could you please save me from these thoughts? And then I can separate from the thoughts. Before having a relationship with God, every crazy thought I would embrace and follow. That's no longer the case. So that, in how it works, for me, that tells a story. It tells me what my problem is. I'm driven by 100 forms of fear. I'm trying to control things that I have no ability to control, and I'm stepping on the toes of others, and they're retaliating. When my former wife told me she wanted a divorce, I was like clueless. What do you mean? Mom, the wind stopped. There's nothing, no problem here. Well, there was a problem. And I can never make amends enough for the way I treated her. But I'll tell you, I was absolutely clueless. I was being driven until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and I became aware of what my problem was, this untreated alcoholism, this mind power disease. I was clueless. I was being driven by instincts gone wild. Now, those instincts, they're still alive and well, but I can treat them now because of this relationship with God. I always think all throughout my day, how would God have me behave? What would God have me say? Would God have me say anything? And that has made my life so much better and the lives of all the people in my life much more comfortable than it was when I was just out there, you know, self-will run riot, you know. This is it's a progressive disease. It just gets my alcoholism just grows and grows. It's there throughout the day. But my recovery is grows and grows also. And my recovery is really to turn to God immediately. You know, I've learned so many things. Anything that, and I always say this because it's the truth, it's my truth. Anything that I've learned that has helped me feel comfortable in life and appreciate my life and know that I'm not alone. I've heard in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous out of the mouths of other alcoholics. When I first started the program, now it's really interesting. I mean, I've learned so much that makes so much sense to me today about how my life has gone. And I realized that throughout my life, even though I didn't realize that God was present and God was guiding it, God was always there. I realize that now. I've had really a privileged, blessed life, even though for many, many years I didn't think so. I thought I was less than, I got less than, you know, I the proverbial glass was less than half full. The glass has always been overflowing. It's my alcoholism, my way of looking at life that was warped, distorted, and was a source of all that pain. So, a couple of as I say, so in 2005, I had retired after 35 years in education. And now I'm free and I'm starting my Alcoholics Anonymous program. And this is pre-COVID. My my home group meets 6 days a week, and I'm going there every morning. and I'm going to other meetings. I'm averaging about 12 meetings a week, all right, from 2005 to till the pandemic, 2020, about 12 meetings a week. And I'm just going to these meetings. I'm never making a decision. Should I go to a meeting or shouldn't I? I'm just in a meeting. And I realized that God was bringing me to those meetings because I needed to hear what was being shared in those meetings. And that was incredible. And then comes the pandemic, and the meetings stop in person, and we go to Zoom. And one of the first meetings that I heard on Zoom, the fellow was speaking. It happened to be Randy M., for any of you who know Randy, who was a primetime speaker. And he talked about what I had, shared before about having an unsatisfiable, highly opinionated, fault-finding mind that talks in its own voice to itself, doesn't deal with frustration well, and absolutely hates the word no. And I said, he's talking about my mind. That's after 15 and a half years with the plug in the jug and going to 12 meetings a week. And I'm still restless, irritable, and discontented. God brought me to that meeting. God brought me to Randy, and Randy brought me to prime time. So I go to primetime meetings all the time, and I have since 2020, March of 2020. And there we're focusing on alcoholism, ego, and self. Alcoholism for me is a combination of my ego and self. Okay. I have to always watch for my ego. That's the source of all my character defects. It's my ego. And I have to go to God to treat that. So, for example, in terms of the ego, you know, one of the real gems that I've heard in these rooms that has helped me tremendously, and it was before prime time, was that somebody talked about, there's two kinds of business. There's my business and none of my business. Wow. Did that blow my mind open? I realized I was always getting into other people's business. I guess that's the codependency. That's still part of my alcoholism. And, now all day long, I'm just saying, none of my business. What goes on in the outside world for this alcoholic to treat my alcoholism is none of my business. If somebody comes to me and I can be of service to them, I can be of help to them, I'm happy to do so. But I'm not intruding into anybody else's life. I'm not telling anybody else what to do, which is what I would always do before. I knew better, or so I thought. I've come to accept that I know nothing. I'm not running the world. God is, it's his world. And I just have to accept an awful lot. When I first read that acceptance passage on page 417 in the fourth edition, you know, acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I'm disturbed, some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life is unacceptable to me. Until I can accept that person, place, or thing, or situation as being exactly the way it's supposed to be in this minute, I can find no serenity. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. Unless I can accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not on what needs to be changed in the world, but what needs to be changed in me and in my attitudes. Boy, did that speak loudly to me when I first read that. So I try to live in a space of acceptance, service, and and trust, and trust in God. I would say that the third step was a very difficult step to really get, to move from a belief in God to trust in God. Because when something would get scary, the first thing my ego would tell me, no, you jump in and take care of that. You get involved. That never worked. So I've learned that, I just got to trust God. I have to see, is this real or is this my alcoholism speaking to me? My my obsessive mind, you know? And there's been a lot of freedom there. The other thing I heard, and this isn't I heard in the rooms of prime time, which has helped me tremendously, to know when I'm with ego as opposed to when I'm with God. And that is, we talk about the five, or we can call them the six C's of the ego. One is controlling, another is criticizing, complaining, comparing, competing, and catastrophizing. I have a tendency towards all those things, and that's my ego. And I know if I'm trying to control something that I have no right or ability to control, I'm with ego. I'm not with God. And I'll turn immediately to God. And so goes the rest of it. I've heard in the rooms, not only of Primetime, but in other AA meetings, the notion that to compare is to despair. So I no longer compare. I was used to spend a lot of my life in comparing and envy. And I no longer do that. Because again, my business and none of my business. I concentrate on all the gifts I have in my life. The other thing that I was going to say with, that space that I try to live in is gratitude. So in the beginning of my journey, I would start off each morning upon getting out of bed. I'd get to my knees and I'd do the third step prayer, the seven-step prayer, and the prayer of St. Francis Assisi. And, I never heard God's voice come to me or anything like that. And then I'd go to my 7 a.m. meeting and I'd hear just exactly what I needed to hear. And that was a practice that I did for quite some time. And then when I came into prime time, one of the speakers had talked about, having a very personal relationship with God and talking directly to God throughout the day. You know, and the way that you maintain a relationship with somebody is you talk to them, you get to know them, you let them get to know you. And so that has been a practice. And, in my years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've had the opportunity to go on many, many spiritual retreats for alcoholic men. And I would basically do at least 2 a year. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I went to one, and the leader who was leading the retreat, he was a recovering alcoholic and he was a Jesuit priest. And he had talked about the power of prayer. He had emphasized it. But he talked not about rote prayers like our third step prayer, our seven-step prayer, and prayer of St. Francis Assisi, but rather talking directly to God. And he had mentioned a practice that he was doing and he had suggested we try. And that is to sit down and set a timer for 5 minutes each day and just talk to God. Just tell God what's going on in your life. And he said, you have to set the timer because 5 minutes, when you're sitting down and talking to God, it could seem very long. So I started that practice and I've been doing it ever since. And, my life has gotten so, so good. And I really feel that it's that talking to God. You know, the, the more familiar I am with God and the more that God is in the center of my life, the more I see God throughout my life, you know? So my wife and I like to go on walks and, in the nice paths in this, you know, preserved land that's by where we live. And the whole time that we're walking, I'm just thanking God. I'm thanking God for the legs that carry me, for the arms that swing freely, for the eyes that see clearly, for the ears that hear the birds, for the beautiful sky. What a great thing it is to just acknowledge all these things that when my life was being run by self, I didn't see any of that. All I would say is my wife wanted to, go on this walk. I'd be saying, you know, I want to do something else. I, it's about being in the now. That's the other thing, how to be in the present. I would always be in the past with regrets or I'd be in the future in fear. I'd never be in the present. And, part of the primetime groups are that they also work with the writings of Emmett Fox, Sermon on the Mount and a couple of his other things. And, he talked about Emmett Fox about, you know, having this he also emphasized the direct relationship with God and how important that is. and to see all the positives, that life is really good. Oh, I know, the point I was gonna, get to is that, instead of inviting God to be with me, I'm coming to recognize that God is always with me, always has been with me. What I need to do is claim that I'm with God, okay? So one of the mantras that came up for me that's been very, very helpful, and I've used it for quite some time is, "I'm with God now, and all is well." That's the truth. In the moment I'm in, all is well, and I have to live in that moment I'm in and recognizing that all is well. If I don't treat my alcoholism will tell me, horrible things are gonna happen, and the past you did so bad. I'm in the now, I'm with God, and all is well. So that, as I say, I could never repay Alcoholics Anonymous and God for the transformation in my life since being in this program of recovery. Chuck C., who was a great messenger of the AA program, in his book, New Pair of Glasses, well, that's what it is. I have a new pair of glasses, a new way of looking at life. For whatever reason, I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. And the reason, you know, my problem was never the alcohol. The alcohol was the solution to treating the alcoholism. That's what I went to get relief from my alcoholism. But the problem was that sense of being apart from, not being a part of. So now and with that came a mentality of scarcity, seeing life as a zero sum game. In other words, if you win, I lose. If I win, you lose, rather than seeing that there's enough for everybody. So come from an orientation of scarcity to seeing life as absolutely abundant. My life is abundant, and I'm not talking about on the material plane. I'm talking about on the spiritual, emotional plane. My, just as it tells us on page 62 and 63, when we trust God and we rely on God and stay close to Him, aligned with Him, and do as He will do, as we believe He would have us do, He'll take care of us, not only emotionally, but also materially. I have everything I need. I was spending, when I felt that there was something that I needed that was going to make me feel okay, I had spent literally hundreds of thousands of dollars on alcohol, other mood altering substances, material items, and none of them ever did it. Now, in recovery and having God in my life, I feel absolutely fulfilled. There's nothing that I want other than peace of mind, and that comes through this program of recovery. And there's nothing that I need other than continuing to grow in this program. As it said, you know, this is an ongoing illness and treatment. It's not alcoholism, it is alcoholism. And it can be dealt with in the moment that it manifests by turning to a power greater than myself. And it's been a wonderful journey. And I hope that others who come into the rooms can experience the same joy that I've received from this journey. And, it's so counterintuitive. And I'll just close by saying that the most wonderful thing about Alcoholics Anonymous for me is that we talk about a God of our own understanding. I'm not going to give anybody my God, and they're not going to give me their God. I'm not going to tell you anything about, you have to have your own understanding of God. So my God has all the qualities that I know that I lack on my own: patient, tolerant, considerate, kind, generous, and loving. Now, I don't have any. That's counterintuitive to the selfish character that I am inside. But by going to that God and trying to be more like that God and asking God to help me each day to be more patient, tolerant, accepting, kind, generous, and loving, I can do that. Can't do it on my own. I'm a complete defeat on my own. I need a power greater than self, and that power is always with me. I just have to turn to him. I think that's my story of recovery, and I hope that maybe that's something that somebody else can relate to. Thanks for letting me share. God bless you all.
Just a quick reminder to subscribe, like, or follow if you like the show on any of your favorite listening platforms. If you like the speakers and other content on the podcast, please show us some love by leaving a review and consider making a PayPal contribution to help keep the show going at paypal.me/a shot glass of recovery. Every dollar makes a difference, and we thank you. Our speakers come from my AA home group, AA Solution Seekers. We meet every day at 7 a.m., so pop in sometime and say hello. Until next time, thanks for joining me on A Shot Glass of Recovery.
Everything you do, the answer lies inside you.